Lieutenant General David Majordakoye.
Well, the power struggle between the government and the opposition in South Sudan continues, both in the political class and in the military. And in the latest move, the Chief of Defense Forces of the South Sudanese People Defense Forces has ordered his generals to remove all checkpoints along River Nile. Well, that order comes at a time when there is heightened tensions in South Sudan between the government and the opposition. There have been flare ups, there have been fighting between the government and the opposition forces in South Sudan. That is the story that I'm going to tell you in this video, as well as I'm going to read you out that memo that has been released by the Chief of Defense Forces ordering the generals to conduct that particular activity along River Nile. I'm going to tell you where specifically they're going to start, up to what particular point along the River Nile that they are going to remove all these checkpoints, as well as in this video, I'm going to tell you why this will be a very, very hard challenge and why the Chief of Defense Forces is directly daring the opposition forces that are allied to the detained Vice President Riek Machar in this removal of the checkpoints along River Nile. And lastly, I'm going to tell you about a previous move just similar to this one that was orchestrated on the highways and how that went down. Well, this is Bonafide. If you haven't subscribed, kindly subscribe and hit that notification button so that when I release something new on the South Sudanese crisis, you get notified as soon as possible. You're hereby ordered to face directly the SPLA-IO forces and positions along River Nile. Well, that is the tone that we're getting from this memo that has been released by the Chief of Defense Forces of the South Sudanese People Defense Forces. That memo that is dated on the 25th of April 2025 read that the South Sudanese People Defense Forces Chief of Defense Forces General Paul Nang Majok, PhD, hereby orders Lieutenant General Theip Gatluak Taitai, Commander for Ground Forces, and Lieutenant General Johnson Olong Thabo, Assistant Chief of Defense Forces, for mobilization and disarmament to immediately commence removal of all illegal checkpoints along or on the River Nile. The removal exercise starts from Juba County, Central Equatoria State, all the way to Malakal Town, Makal County, Upper Nile State. The operation aims at achieving the following set objectives: increase trade volume and widen scope of commercial activities, permanently eliminate unnecessary and unauthorized taxes or levies, and to ease and enhance fast and effective river transportation. Lieutenant General Marshal Stephen Bebonen, CMI, Chief of Military Intelligence, is hereby directed to diligently and effectively supervise the execution of the aforementioned orders. Well, that is the order that has come from the Chief of Defense Forces of the SSPDF, ordering the military generals to execute the activity of removing all checkpoints along River Nile. Well, that on paper seems very easy to do, but what is perhaps very difficult is the fact that some of these checkpoints are controlled by SPLA-IO forces. These are the forces that are allied to Riek Machar, the first vice president of South Sudan. And therefore, if the South Sudanese Defense Forces, as commanded by the CDF, are going to remove all these checkpoints along River Nile, it means that they are going to have an encounter with the SPLA-IO along these River Niles on the checkpoints that they control. It is important to note that the SPLA-IO is not getting their orders from the Chief of Defense Forces. Well, in theory, they are supposed to get their orders from the Chief of Defense Forces. But as things are right now in South Sudan, the first vice president being detained under house arrest, his wife, and other major leaders from the military and the political class of the opposition being under house arrest, it therefore means that the SPLA-IO will not read this as an order from the army for them to follow. Their chain of command would have come from the first vice president and allied leaders, and those not being present to give that order, it means that they're not going to follow these orders. Therefore, it means perhaps they're going to stay put on River Nile to continue their activities along the said checkpoints. It is important to note that far from the war that happened in the Upper Nile state, in Nasir County, where the SPLM in government overpowered the White Army in Nasir County, assisted, of course, by the Uganda's People Defense Forces, they overpowered the White Army in Nasir County. And by the way, the White Army came out and said that that was just an agreement. Well, that is not confirmed. What we know is that the Chief of Defense Forces went to Nasir County to affirm that the government is indeed in control of Nasir County as at now. This is also coming at a time when the spokesperson of the SPLA-IO just days ago said that their positions were being attacked in central Equatoria State near Juba, that there are some of their cantonment that were attacked by the SPLM in government, that is the South Sudanese Defense Forces. And then we're having this political back and forth from the political class, as well as now we are reading that is also coming from the military leaders, that there is some kind of a rift between the people in government and those in opposition. It therefore means that the kind of mood right now in the country does not appreciate these huge measures that have been taken by the South Sudanese Defense Forces. Although they are supposed to take these measures as the military in place, but the status in South Sudan right now is conflicting, because we have people who are allied to the president, and then we have people who are allied to the first vice president. And this is not a new measure that has been taken in South Sudan. In January, attempts to dismantle illegal checkpoints along major highways in western Bahr el Ghazal and western Equatoria states sparked clashes between the two factions, further straining their fragile relations. Therefore, it means that it will be almost impossible for these two parties not to clash at some point if at all these orders are going to be followed. The checkpoints that are operated by the SPLA-IO are going to be a hot point for the South Sudanese Defense Forces to remove, because they are going to defend their checkpoints as SPLA-IO. Not only as that, but right now we are having twice as much as a crisis as there was in January. In January, the first vice president was not under detention. The leaders of the military of the SPLA-IO were not in detention. Right now, both of these leaders are in detention, and it means that the tensions are very, very high in South Sudan, and there is likelihood of further clashes from this order that has been given from the South Sudanese Defense Forces CDF. While this might be a strategy by the government of the day to reinstate order in the country, perhaps to have one army that is unified under the president, it is important to note that people are losing their lives amidst all this stalemate that continues to take place in South Sudan. Over 200 people have lost their lives. Thousands, tens of thousands, in fact, have already fled their homes because of these heightened tensions. Businesses are disrupted. And this now affects regionally. Neighbors of South Sudan are feeling the impact of these tensions, and this has to be resolved through peaceful means. And that is now also what has led to many questions, as no peace envoy has been allowed to see or talk to or communicate with Riek Machar, raising questions further about what is happening in South Sudan and if there is an endgame to what the government of the day is planning to do. Well, I will keep you informed of the latest of what is happening in South Sudan regarding this latest crisis. Keep it bona fide.